afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're calling in from. This is Amy Glasscock with NASCIO, here at NASCIO headquarters with several of my colleagues. Thank you for joining the webinar today. This webinar is hosted by the NASCIO Privacy and Data Protection Working Group. We'll get started in just a minute, but first I wanted to go over just a few housekeeping items. Your line will be muted during the presentation, just to avoid any background noise or anything like that. We will unmute lines for questions at the end, or if you prefer, you can type your question into the chat box, and we'll address it that way as well. We are recording this webinar, so if you'd like to watch it at a later date, it'll be available if you registered, and you can share it with your colleagues as well. So, thanks again for joining our webinar demonstration of privacy modeling. Privacy modeling is a specialized search engine from Washington State that helps government employees spot privacy issues before moving forward on a project. As we all know, government is using more data than ever in rendering services to citizens, yet government has few tools to enforce privacy rules or considerations, and obviously can't simply hire enough people to meet the demand for expertise. So, after consulting with academic and legal experts from the privacy community in Seattle, the state's Chief Privacy Officer, Alex Albin, retained a software firm to create a web application, which returns relevant search requests based on the intended use of personal information in a product or service. It's live, in use, open source, and Alex is going to show us how it works today and answer any questions that you may have. So, with that, I will turn it over to Alex Albin.
Hi, thank you very much for that nice introduction, and welcome to everybody on the call. And I know you'll distribute contact information after this webinar, but feel free to reach out to me with questions or interest in what we're doing. My email address is my name, alex.albin, A-L-B-E-N, at WATECH, W-A-T-E-C-H, .wa.gov. So, good morning, and let's dive into it. What you see here is the website for my office, the Office of Privacy and Data Protection. This was created about a year ago by our state legislature.
Alex, just to stop you really quickly, we are not seeing your screen.
Oh, okay. Well, then that's not good. Share my screen. Okay, I said share. Oh, are you seeing it now? Yes.
Yes.
Got it now? Okay, cool. Well, there we go. This is the website for the Office of Privacy. As I said, we were put into law in Washington State a year ago, and the one thing they didn't do was give me a big staff. So the challenge of this office, and I'm sure anybody who works in the privacy area, is how to get the word out, how to do all the things that we want to do in terms of training, in terms of developing best practices, meeting with others, doing consumer education. The first effort we did was actually to create a website that's dedicated to consumer privacy, which I think is a little bit rare. If you spend any time on this site, you'll see the thing we're really emphasizing is the privacy guide and tips and tools. These are the most popular features of this site because consumers, we found, are very hungry for information. Privacy modeling, as we mentioned in the introduction, is sort of an experiment to see if we can use technology to scale where, you know, a very small office can't reach everybody in state government. I'm sure that's the case for most of you. We have over 50 state agencies. They're very independent. It's not that people were not working on privacy before my office was created, but we didn't have a lot of coordination or organization or training. This is, as I said, one of the first steps towards that. And if you go to our website, you can click on the Privacy Modeling tab. We are still running this beta test, and you can click on the application, which is live. And what you will get, the first time you go there, you'll get something called a tutorial, which we thought was important because some people want orientation and explanation of every aspect of the site. I feel the site is very intuitive. We designed it that way. And even though we do have this disclaimer and this link for a user guide, what we really want people to do is get started. So you just click on that button. Now this is the tutorial. So it says, do you want to pick from any of the 12 categories below? And the way we organized this in step 1 is we wanted to orient people as to where they sit in state government or in some other entity. You know, do you work in medical? Do you work in licensing? Do you work in insurance? Now you can click on any or all of these tiles. The product, I think, gives clearer results if you try to target certain kinds of organization and information. And the hypothetical that I like to pose is, you know, if you're working in state government and you're working in healthcare, you know about HIPAA. This tool is not designed for you. If you're discovering HIPAA for the first time and you work for our Department of Health and Human Services, we're in trouble. What it really is designed for is for the people designing a product that's a little bit outside of their domain. So, for example, we have a Fish and Wildlife Department, and say they want to do a guide for fishing for children, the fun of fishing. One of the things they would do is they would say, okay, well, I'm going to do this online service, a website directed at children. And maybe I'm using some student information. Maybe I'm reaching out to schools when I do this. So you click on those tiles. And this is the tutorial saying, okay, now what kind of personal information am I going to use in the product or service that I'm building? We narrowed it down to 31 different categories of personal information. Obviously, there are probably hundreds of different kinds of personal information that would make a sort of unwieldy application. And so we engaged in a selection process to think about, well, what are the most likely ones? So in this case, we're going to use kids' names, maybe their gender. Not going to touch on these things, legal status or citizenship. Maybe we'll want to know their birthday. And let's see, what else we want to know. Maybe we'll have the kids post photographs and images of catching a fish with their dad. Anything else we need to have here? No. So you select your categories, and then you go to step 3. And this is where we ask people, well, how are you going to use this information? And let me pause here to say, I recognize that when we do new products and services, many of them are not done actually in-house in state government. A lot of the web development and a lot of other kinds of software development is farmed out to third-party contractors. And I really want to make the point that this is a tool that's good for them, because they may not have gotten a lot of guidance about privacy issues. They're just sort of under contract to build a product and deliver it. So they can use this tool to understand and to flag certain issues that are going to arise with the use of data. So when we've got the third step here on our screen, how are we going to use it? Well, we're not going to sell this data from the kids. We're going to share it, we're going to store it, and we're going to publish our newsletter, both online and maybe in a physical magazine. And then we explained certain things that are going on if you're not clear what these tiles actually mean. Okay, so we said we're going to share it, and now we're going to go to the next step, which is a dashboard. So here's what we got. This tool has pinged our database, and essentially this is a specialized search engine. We have loaded the database with laws of the federal government, about 18 laws dealing with privacy, and Washington State, another 17, 18 laws. And each of those laws has been tagged for the type of personal information that is mentioned or governed in that law. So this database made a call based on our inputs and said, we've come up with some limitations on how you can use some of the information. For example, can you store someone's date of birth? There's a limitation on this. And you click on the exclamation point, and there's an RCW, which in Washington State is the laws of Washington. And when you click on that, it takes you to the law that is regarding the collection, sharing, and use of student information. And that's sort of the end result here. We want the user to say, oh, there's a law about this. We don't necessarily want them to make a legal judgment or, write a memo. We want them to know, hey, there's an issue here. So let's say, oh, we're going to share the photographs and images. What's that law? Well, it comes up with a federal law. And when you click on that, that law is probably COPA, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. So you can then read this law, but more importantly, we want to just flag that there is an issue with sharing the information of children online. The other thing that it comes up with is no specific law found. And that doesn't mean that it's necessarily okay to widely use this information. It simply means that based on the permutations in our database and the kind of search that I just did, we did not find a specific law about storing gender information when it has to do with students. Let's do another search. I'm going to pick a category, and because we realize that not every agency or user of this tool is going to fit into a specific agency, we also have this general tab. Let's say we want to do something to do with drivers and vehicle information and licensing information. Then we pick the types of personal information, name, social security number, driver's license. Here we do want citizenship, date of birth, and maybe we also are going to take a photo of them for their driver's license, and maybe we want emergency contact info as well. As I said, you can click on as many of these tiles as you want to expand your search. And what's the purpose? Well, we want to grant a license here. We're not going to sell it or rent it. We might share it with other agencies. We are going to store it. So we went to those three uses, and it generates another dashboard. This dashboard has the red, yellow, and green lights. So it found a clear prohibition about sharing photographs and images. This law, we found 2 Washington State laws regarding this. A note on the use of the search: if you don't want to go directly to the code, you can then do a Google search, which brings you the relevant search results based on Google. So we just have 2 modes of search that are pre-populated. Oh, I'm glad to see the privacy modeling tool is coming up here. That's good. And again, we found other limitations. So can you share driver's license information? Apparently, under the U.S. Code, there are laws restricting motor vehicle records and sharing. The takeaway, as I said, is for the user then to say, I have some questions about what we can keep in our database, how we can share the information, and what we can do with it, and to have a discussion with the program manager or the owner, the business owner of the product, who then will say, oh yeah, well we thought about that, that's okay or not okay. What we really also want to do is steer everybody into the user guide. So this is our user guide, and I'm just scrolling through the tutorial very quickly because we highlighted things which I'm going to talk through. When we started this project, we had a mandate. We actually got a grant to do this project from the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. We had a grant to do something called Privacy by Design. Many of you are probably familiar with what that means. It has some specific meanings in the academic world and the legal world, but the way we're using this term is simply we're designing a product and we're thinking about privacy. What I have found actually because I come from the tech world, I've done product development, is that in most products that use personal information, people stop around here. You know, we design it, we collect PII, we process it in some way, and we store it. We don't really think through the other parts of the life cycle of sharing data. How do you share it? Who is authorized? Under what agreements? How are we going to use it? Very importantly, how long are we going to retain it? And then deletion. If you design a product and stop here, you're going to run into situations where you have collected vast amounts of PII, kept it in some product or database, and have all of these legacy problems to deal with at the end of the product life cycle. So how do you address these things up front? You have to have a plan. We describe what the dashboard is. We also want people to know, just because we have given you some dashboard results, that doesn't mean that you can use the data the way you want to, because maybe you didn't even collect the data legally. You know, where did it come from? Did you have restrictions on that data? I find in my experience that once we get going on products, very few people pause to say, where did we get that data? Usually a developer doesn't really even think about that as their job, but we want people to pause and think and ask questions about the method of data collection. In our state, and I know in other states, we have a strong Public Records Act. So this tool does not address the requirements of the Public Records Act, which does have some specific requirements about certain kinds of personal information. And here we want to tell people, at least in Washington State, look, we've got this Public Records Act, and we need to comply with it. And then we give some guidelines on general usage of how to use the product. One of the things that we also decided to do was, we don't cover necessarily every new privacy law. In fact, we stopped updating this database on November 1st. And in order to keep it current, we're going to have to update this, which means we have to update our database. Then, of course, we have quite a few lawyers who wanted to say what this product does and doesn't do. You know, it's not a lawyer in a box. I really want to make that clear. Some people, when they use a tool, all of a sudden feel like it's giving, you know, definitive answers. The tool is not interpreting law. The tool is not even interpreting policy because it doesn't know policy. It's really a law finder and an issue spotter. And then in the interest of transparency, we do list the laws that we did research and tag for the database, and also the Washington State laws that are in the database. And I think as you saw, there are two modes of results in the tool. So you could just do a federal search. So I imagine a lot of you don't really care about Washington State law, but you can just use this federal mode, and then it will triage the results based on that. And if you can do Washington law, it populates it with more of the Washington laws. This tool took about 6 months to design from beginning to end. We did use an outside development firm here in Seattle, which was very, consumer design focused. We really have gotten some good initial reaction and a lot of questions about it. And I'm happy that we had the opportunity to develop this, and now we would appreciate user feedback because we want to see how people are using it, what kinds of things they find of value, maybe what things they find are confusing, and whether in general this has utility for them. With that, I'll stop talking for a second. I'd love to take questions.
All right, we're going to unmute everyone so you can talk in a second, and you can also type into the chat box.
All guests have been unmuted.
Any questions?
All right, we've got one in the chat box here. How easy is this to tweak for our state if we adopt this?
The steps that someone would need to take, first of all, we have published, or actually maybe in the next day or two, the code is going to go up on GitHub. So we're going to have an open source for the actual code, which anybody can grab. But that's only going to get you half of the way there. You're going to have to look at the database and understand how to update the database. As I said, the database, it's basically a big Excel spreadsheet, and we tagged laws. So we have a little tutorial that we've made on how to tag laws for this particular database. And the one thing I would want to stress is you have to have consistency in your approach, the way you look at the various laws. So I don't know how many privacy laws that particular state has that they would want to add. It took us, once we trained, we had some law students at the University of Washington who I worked with, and they did a really fast job once we decided on the protocol of how to tag. So that's the key thing to be able to teach.
All right, I'm going to go to another question in the chat box. I'm very interested to know your lawyer's take on this. Presumably they were deeply involved in its development. Were there significant objections? Obviously, you also have to keep it up to date. What is that governance like?
We did have legal consultation from the beginning. When we built this tool, we actually had 3 teams. We had a legal team, a software team, and sort of a distribution team. And so we've had some of the very best privacy lawyers in Washington State involved from the beginning. I think that the key thing is to recognize what the tool is, what it does, and what it doesn't do. I think there may be some lawyers who say, well, you may get a false result from this. You may miss a law that's not covered, or you may miss a scenario that's not covered. Or some people seem to think that it covers, even though we say this over and over again, that it only applies to a very specific set of privacy laws. Some users think it's searching all laws. And so it's very important to have an understanding that this is sort of a first step tool. And I think when lawyers understand that, they get comfortable with it. There may be some lawyers who are not comfortable with any kind of research tool like this. But my perspective is people can search law on Google today. People can do this same sort of searching, by saying, I want to use a driver's license for this and this and this, and you could do a web search. This is only a specialized search engine, and I hope that one of the values of this tool is that it brings people to the user guide where we flag all these things. We are going to need to have continuing resources to update this tool, because laws do change, and that's an investment in resources. For us, it's incremental, but for others, you have to clarify for people how often this product is being updated. Next.
All right. The next question in our chat box is, can you give us an idea of the effort required to initially populate the database?
The database has about 4,500 entries, and it took a few weeks, as I said, once we had our method down. We spent months and months talking about the method of how we were going to tag laws, so that's the human element, the interpretation of the law. I don't think a computer could, a computer can do word search, but this does require some interpretation of when we want to think that law is relevant to a certain type of personal information. So finding the people to do this, we found some wonderful law students, training them, and then the actual population of the database didn't take that long once we had the methodology down.
All right. And before I go back to the chat box, does anybody have any questions on the phone that they'd like to ask? Okay. Our next question is this 100% open source, or are you or your developer retaining any IP rights?
It's 100% open source. That's actually a requirement of our grant. And I want to add that this is not a very sophisticated piece of software. It's built on Ruby on Rails. It tries to use basic kinds of web protocols, and it's not that great. It's very simple. You could do this yourself, I'm sure. It's basically just creating a database with a filter. So the important thing for us is that we want to, it's owned by the public here, and we want to share the tool with others.
All right, and the next question is, can you share more about the methodology of choosing and adding law to the database?
Sure. Let's take an example of a law. We have a law in Washington State about the Constitution's right to privacy. That's in our state constitution. And you have to look at that law, which was written in, I think, 1889, and it basically says the government shall not, search and seize people's personal effects and papers. So how do you tag that law with respect to the 31 kinds of personal information? One of the things we actually had to do with that section is do some legal research on how the Washington State Constitution had been interpreted over the years with respect to the right of privacy. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your perspective, there's very little case law on our state right of privacy. So that didn't take very long to do. And in effect, there's very few types of personal information are going to trigger that. Let's see, we have a law on distribution of intimate images. This is the so-called Revenge Porn Act that we did about a year ago in Washington. And so that will say you cannot use photography and images to sell, rent, share, publish. And so every time you go to the user guide, you will have a tag for various things that are mentioned in that law. If it's a person's name, if it's a photograph of that person, then that law will have a tag in the database that will trigger it when you do your search. So I'll just say photograph, and let's say somebody's name, maybe someone's gender. And then if you wanted to store it or share it or publish it, then it would flag that law, and hopefully it will come up with that law. So you have to look at each of the 3 filters and tag the law accordingly. So you kind of do it from the inside out. Next.
Okay, we don't have any more in the chat box right now, so if anyone else has a question, you can just speak up or type it in the box. Like we've got someone typing. All right, what is the website to get to the privacy beta site if available to us?
The website is privacy.wa.gov. And then you just go to the tab that says Privacy Modeling.
All right, looks like we've got another question coming. Oh, thanks, Eric.
What was our budget for the project? The budget, the total grant was $90,000. And this is a first-of-a-kind product that did involve a lot of research, and as I said, we had 3 different teams working on it for several months before we settled on the project. So, a bit of the cost was related to the cost of those teams. But the total budget for actually creating this tool was under $60,000, if you want to look at just the software cost.
All right, looks like we've got a few more questions being developed as we speak. And I'll go ahead and say right now that if you are interested in using this for your state, to please contact Alex via his email, and he can help you out getting started on that. And he would, even if you just think you might be interested, Alex would love to hear from you.
Okay, the question we got, thank you for the compliment, is Washington planning on making this analysis part of project initiation? Right now we're not requiring it for new projects, but I think that it's a good idea, and I am going around state government. In fact, I'm meeting with the different cabinet level agencies today and socializing this and marketing it for people to use. Some agencies have already indicated that they're going to use it for everything. I think other agencies have a more wait and see approach. But it would be a good tool, I would say, for any new project that involves citizen data. And we're not unlike other states, everything we do involves citizen data of some kind or another. So the more we can surface privacy issues, the better. And and as I said, the ideal outcome here is that someone says, oh, there's like this federal law that we have to work on when we're going to use children's names. And then they call their lawyer, and then lawyer says, yes, there is this law, and it's called COPA, and I want to review your final product. That's really the trigger, the circle of events that we want to ensure with this. I see we have 1 or 2 more questions coming in.
All right, so the next question is, how do you plan on educating people? How do you plan on educating people on how to correctly use this? Yeah, sorry, an email popped up right over the question on my computer.
Well, we did the tutorial, which hopefully is a good orientation. I would say this should have some training behind it, because I have the ability to go around to the different agencies in our state and do demonstrations and do training and see who's interested. We may also publish more of a user guide, but I have to say that the impulse behind this product is that I've worked with developers for 20 years, and developers like to use tools that give them information quickly. And so, we oriented this tool to be a get started tool. And I guess there's a balance of risk here between letting people use research tools to find out things for themselves versus, watching them every step of the way. And I think that just will really depend on the risk tolerance of different organizations. This is really not geared for people who already have a legal team, in-house. It's geared for agencies that don't have legal resources and to be purely additive to whatever they have. This is another question. Will you use this with IT contractors? We are strongly encouraging it for IT contractors. And as I said, the goal is for the IT contractor. And I find that many developers, especially people I have worked with in the course of my career dealing with consumer data, they actually want to do the right thing with respect to data. They care about privacy. Many of them are sort of privacy hawks. And so we do want them to use the tool, but then also to know who to surface the issues to for someone working in whoever who's supervising their project. The next question is, does the database address privacy control frameworks like NIST? It does not. That is something that we could add to the database. It's harder. We found it harder to add policy to the database. We tried to do that. What happens, though, is that there are many different kinds of policies, at least on the state level, relating to how different agencies treat personal information. And so it became too much of a, we couldn't work through the issues involving interpreting policy. Although I think you could do something with like the NIST framework. Next question, what is our next step? Could you see this move into privacy policy statements or notice? I would like to see this widely distributed. It occurs to us that privacy modeling has application beyond sort of just state government. Certainly city governments who don't have a lot of resources but who are processing citizen data. But we've also been approached by nonprofits and small businesses that just think this is a useful tool. So I guess we want to socialize it. We want to make it part of the product development experience for agencies inside the state. Does the database include PCI requirements? So now I have to say, I don't know what PCI stands for. Payment card industry. Sorry. Thank you. It does not touch PCI requirements. We deal with some credit reporting laws, but we don't deal with PCI. Okay, are we recording this so we can show others? I believe
Yes,
Amy
we are.
said that we are. Okay.
Yes. And we can send out the recording link to the registered attendees.
Doug, does the tool work on mobile platforms? Yes, it does. We've tested it on various mobile smartphone platforms. It does work. The display is not as, I don't know, easy as a website because we have to present the 31 different categories of PII, and that's a very long scroll, but it does work quite well on a mobile platform. The next question, how broadly did we cast our net in defining what is privacy law? Did we consider security requirements as comprised within category of privacy? We took a fairly narrow approach to what is a privacy law, and I think that that's where the limits of this tool are apparent. We list the privacy laws that we talk about, which we think are the major privacy laws, but we don't include security. There are other laws that might deal with a citizen's status, which may not be a privacy law, and that is a matter of interpretation. And so this tool would probably benefit from having the database cover more. And then we're always going to have that tricky balance of expectations that will then, don't you cover everything? My only response to that is we don't cover everything. It's a specialized search engine. And if people want to search everything, they should just do a web search. I do envision that you could create sort of specialized versions of privacy modeling for specific laws. For example, the new European GDPR. Maybe we could do a privacy modeling app that just interprets that. That would be kind of cool. I think, as I said at the outset, the tool works well when you have a specific search and category of personal information in mind. If you're searching for everything, this tool is going to miss things because it has a finite database. All right, well, Amy, do we see any more questions popping up?
Will you be at the NASCIO mid-year conference in April? From Doug.
We're working on our state budget right now, so if Doug could put in a good word with our governor, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, and then one other question: do you see this assisting with privacy impact assessments?
I do. I think that it could be a good part of a privacy impact assessment.
Okay, great. Any other questions, anyone? All right. Well, as I mentioned before, you please follow up with Alex if you are interested in using this for your estate, or if you have any other questions about it, he would love to hear from you, and they would love to share this. So Alex, thank you so much. This was really great, really neat tool that you guys have developed, and I appreciate you sharing it with us.
You are very welcome, and thanks